Hi, everybody. So, if you missed our first meeting to Journey to Wellness, this is really important information to help you understand why we're doing what we're doing, what we eat, and so on. So, we're going to really look at what it means to lose weight and how we go there. So, first of all, the first thing you need to know is who we are. Uh, Dion and I are certified in different areas. Dion is a certified life coach, and I am a certified nutrition coach, but mainly I am a high school science teacher. Medical disclaimer, first of all, this information is used just for informational purposes, educational purposes. Hopefully, you have a relationship with your own practitioner and you can work on your own medical conditions. So if you're going to change anything, make sure you talk to your own doctor. But I want to educate you about the information that I've learned over time. So why are you here, right? What brings you to this meeting in the first place? Why do you want to be here? So the reason I'm here has a lot to do with a lifelong obesity problem. So if you look at that picture, 2017, that was me at my heaviest. I am 5'9" and I weighed approximately 320 pounds. And so very large and had crept up on me over time. Yes, that is Jadis from The Walking Dead. And my husband and I, we were at a WalkerCon. I have a family history of Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's is diabetes type 3. And so, if you do not control your diabetes, which I was diagnosed with in 2018, Alzheimer's can be caused by insulin resistance in the brain. And so, personally, I just use those things as kind of this impetus that I've got to figure out what is wrong with me and how to fix it. So, I want you to pause your video in just a second and I want you to actually write this down. I want you to think for a minute what brought you to the program. Why were you in the meeting? Why do you want to be in the meetings? What has got you here? What are you hoping you will gain from this experience? What are you going to learn? What do you want to change? What's going to happen? And then how can we, the members of this Journey to Wellness program, how can we help you reach your dreams? So I want you to go ahead and pause the video right now, and I want you to go ahead and write those things down on a piece of paper. The more you participate, the more you'll get out of it. So what we're going to look at today is two different types of weight loss, two different weight loss philosophies. So in my studies and in my journey to find healing for my own self, what I have discovered is that there are two different ways that most people look at how weight loss happens. The first model is the most common. I've been learning about this since I was a little kid, is this calories in versus calories out. And what that simply means is that the amount of calories you take in versus the amount of calories that you're burning. So this little picture, you can see she's running to try to make up for the food that she's eating. What is a calorie in the first place? So a calorie is defined as a unit of heat or energy measurement. It's what it is scientifically. And so what they do is it's the amount of energy needed to raise raise water by 1 degree Celsius for 1 kilogram of water. So that's 2.2 pounds for those of us who don't use the metric system. So how do they do that? What they do is they create this device. They have a device called a bomb calorimeter in which they've got water on the outside and then they've got the substance that they're going to burn on the inside. And they will literally burn the item until it reaches an ash form and measure how many degrees of Celsius the water has changed in temperature. So they take a piece of broccoli or they take a piece of steak or whatever and they burn it. And that's really easy for things like broccoli and steak, but it gets really complicated when we're talking about liquids, and it gets really complicated when we're talking about processed foods that are made out of a lot of different things. So by law, all packages have to report how many calories an object contains. So a calorie is what it takes to burn and raise the temperature of water, but we're using that as a measurement in our bodies. Calories burned by your body, on the other hand, are totally much more complicated, right? Determining how your body burns calories really depends on things like your height, right? I mentioned I was 5'9". So if you're shorter, if you're taller, it does make a difference. Your current weight, right? Because the amount of weight that I carry each and every day has to be carried with me as I'm going through. And so my weight determines that. Your age, typically the younger you are, the more calories you burn. When you guys are little, Obviously, per weight, it's not the same, but you're growing and you're building your body. Once you reach, your 50s and 60s, you start to do less of that. Your activity level, if you're sedentary or if you run marathons, right? And then your body composition. You could weigh 250 pounds and so could somebody else, but if they're super muscular, they're going to be using more energy just to survive than if you're more fat based. So basically, what we're saying is that if our body is a closed system where we take in food, we burn it, and it then turns into energy that we use, and if we work like a machine, then if we eat more calories than we burn, we're going to gain weight. And if we eat fewer calories than we burn, we should lose weight, right? So the current theory says that if you reduce your total intake of calories by 3,500 calories, or sometimes a little bit more, you will lose 1 pound of weight. Because technically, if I take a pound of fat and I put it in the bomb calorimeter, it burns 350 calories. And so that is the philosophy. So if I drop 500 calories a day, in a week, I should drop a pound. So under this model, this calories in versus calories out, it doesn't matter what you eat, only which amount of calories are you eating. So if you're eating less than your body needs, you should lose weight. If you're eating more than your body needs, you're going to gain weight. Doesn't matter what kind of calories it is. You could drink ice cream and eat cupcakes and ho-hos all day long. So under this philosophy, if these things are true, then what they're saying is that you can do all things in moderation, right? You can have a little bit of this and a little bit of that. You should track your calories on an app because most of us don't know how many calories are in something. So if I'm tracking my calories on an app, I need to make sure that I'm massing my food, or I'm measuring how many ounces of whatever I'm eating, how many cups and whatever I'm eating. Because if I don't measure, then I don't know how accurately I'm going to be determining my calories. And if I'm in a calorie deficit, I will lose weight. That's what calories in, calories out says. If this is not working for you, and by show of hands, I can only imagine how many of you that would be, you must be counting wrong, right? You don't know what 12 ounces is. Well, most of us can't look at something and say it's 12 ounces, but if we put it on a scale, we should be able to. Or you've just been lying to yourself. You don't know what's going on. And if you're like me, you probably have not had that work. Why is this? Well, there are two research studies I want to point out that talk about how calorie burning abilities change based on what we actually eat, right? If I burn 2,500 calories a day, which my Fitbit says I burn about 2,700 calories a day, if it's accurate. If I burn 2,700 calories every single day and I only have access to 1,000 calories a day because I'm in starvation, can I lose weight infinitely? And we all know that's not realistic. So a study was done in the 1940s during World War II with some conscientious objectors. 36 white healthy males were put through a 1-year long study called a semi-starvation study. And they did this not to see how much you could lose weight, but it was really designed to help put people's weight back on them after famine brought on by World War II in Europe. So what did they do? The first phase of this study, the baseline was that the men were given 12 weeks of a maintenance calories. So for most of the men, that was about 3,200 calories a day. And they wanted to keep the men at a basic level. Now, there were a few men who were a little underweight. And so they actually tried to get them to gain to that 12-week to the average normal weight. And there were a few men who were a little overweight, and they lowered their calories just a little bit to try to get them close to that balanced weight. And then once they got them there, they just kept them there. And if you know, back in the 40s, we were a lot more close to our normal healthy weight. In phase 2, they did severe calorie restriction for the next 24 weeks, which, if you're doing the math, that's 6 months. So for 6 months, the men's diets were controlled so that they lost approximately 25% of their body weight. And typically the way they did that was actually reducing their calories in half. So for most of the men, that dropped their calories down to about 1,600 calories a day, which if you're a woman in the United States, you've probably been told you should eat no more than 1,200 calories a day, which, by the way, is about the amount that you need if you're in like first grade. And so this body weight, they dropped and dropped and dropped, and they kept dropping the men's calorie intake because they started to level off, right? Once they would level off, they'd drop their calorie intake again. In phase 3 of the study, the men were put into 4 different groups for recovery to get them returned back to health. And so they treated them differently. And this is where the base of the experiment was. How do we get people to gain their weight back in a healthy fashion? Okay. Some men were given just a little bit extra, some were given unlimited amounts of food, and so on and so forth. And then in the fourth phase, the very last portion of the study, men were given permission to unrestrict their feeding. Like after they had done some of the recovery, they were given unrestricted. And what happened is the men had spent the entire 24 weeks so hungry and so famished that they read magazines about food, they thought about food constantly, they were depressed, they were anxious, they were moody, they were stressed out. And so when they were given the opportunity to eat unrestrictedly, even though they were told it wouldn't be good for you to just keep eating and eating, some of the men ate up to 10,000 calories a day. And they gained their weight back, obviously, fairly quickly. What was really important about this study and what they've used it for so many times since is studying not only this starvation and what happens to your body's metabolism. So in phase 2, as they lowered the calories that people were eating, as they lost weight, eventually their bodies balanced again, right? And their bodies balanced and said, okay, I can deal with only having 1,600 calories and I'm going to stay the same weight. So they would have to keep dropping their calories in order for them to continue to lose weight. Secondly, what they found is that there were some mental health side effects that were severe, to the point that after this study, several of the men actually maintained almost eating disorder levels of obsession with food that did not go away. It permanently did some changes to their metabolics, and it permanently did some changes to their psyche. And so this study shows that the calorie burning is not just in, out, in, out. The men were made to work, and they continued to do things while they were in this study for this 1 year. When they regained their weight, most of them gained it back at a higher body fat percent as opposed to the lean muscle mass that most of us are wanting to gain and have. Another study I want to talk about is the Biggest Loser study. So if you've ever seen the Biggest Loser, the original cast was tested 6 years following their competition. So many of them reached incredible amounts of weight loss. They definitely reached their goals, became so fit, and then they studied them 6 years afterwards. So the Biggest Loser competition for the winners and the people in that it's a 30-week competition. So even if they get sent home early, they're still competing for 30 full weeks. So that's almost a year. That's 2/3 of a year. Their resting metabolic rate had dropped at the end of those 30 weeks by approximately 500 calories a day. So my 2,700 now has dropped down to 2,200 calories just because of the extreme dieting I was doing. Secondly, the resting metabolic rate did not recover in those 6 years. So when they went back to eating a more normal size diet, they actually were still working with a lower metabolism, which meant they could not eat the same foods after the study as before and maintain the same weight they were. Not just not regain, but like go back to their starting point and stay there. They had to eat less food. The metabolic adaptation acts to decrease the energy expenditure and thereby impedes the rate of weight loss during an intervention. However, the Biggest Loser participants with the greatest weight loss at the end of the competition also experienced the greatest slowing of their metabolic rate at that time. So that's basically saying the more success you had on weight loss, the lower your metabolic rate was. So this calories in, calories out gets tricky when your body's calories out changes just because of what the calories in you're taking. So the research has found, of course, that the majority of the participants had a significant regain of their weight loss using this starvation method. They were allowed to eat 800 calories total plus unlimited leafy greens. Now, again, I said, 1,200 calories is something that a small child needs. 800 is ridiculous. And leafy greens, for the most part, many of us cannot digest. So that brings me to the other form of weight loss, the other type. So we've got the calories in model, and everybody keeps saying you have to be in a deficit, you have to be in a deficit, you have to be in a deficit. Well, being in a deficit, number one thing it does in a large deficit is it's going to make you hungry, and it's going to make your body slow down its metabolism. So is that really how our bodies function? Do we function like a machine? So the next method is the hormonal model of weight loss. And I want to talk about a couple human hormones that you need to know about. Now, some of you may have heard of insulin, and most of you know that insulin is a hormone used by diabetics who need to maintain their blood sugar levels. So in your body, your pancreas creates this hormone. This hormone's job, one of its jobs, is to actually take the blood sugar in your diet and put it into your individual cells so they can burn it like a fuel. It also is responsible for helping you build muscles. It's also responsible for regulating a lot of other hormones. So insulin's an extremely important molecule. It does a whole lot more than just manage your blood sugar, but the blood sugar is what I want to talk about first. So this maintaining your blood glucose levels and your energy storage. So if you look at this picture, what you'll see is two different cells. And insulin is the little yellow molecule that goes into this insulin receptor. When the insulin receptor is triggered by insulin, then the cell opens the door, the glucose channel, it's called GLUT1. It opens this door and it allows in glucose molecules. Now, some cells, like your red blood cells, don't need insulin in order to take in glucose. They can do so all by themselves. Other cells, like cells in your liver, can actually create glucose from some of your other foods. But most of the cells in your body need insulin to get the glucose out. So if you have high levels of glucose in your bloodstream, your body will need more insulin to trigger more cells to cause more glucose to be put into storage or into some cell to be burned. Now, if we're not burning it, we're eventually going to turn it into fat, and we'll talk about that at another date. If your body has no insulin, you cannot store fat, and it will not allow energy to enter most of your body cells. So if a type 1 diabetic is not given insulin, they'll die. Their bodies will starve to death no matter how much food you give them. You feed them and feed them. So back in the day before they discovered insulin, it was called a wasting disease, and people would literally just waste away. Their bodies would die because they could not process what's happening. Now we know that diabetes is a lot more than just the insulin managing blood sugar, but that's a big part of it. Some people who are diagnosed with diabetes type 1 will actually underdose their insulin on purpose so they can eat whatever they want and not get fat. Insulin's role in sugar uptake then is very normal. It's healthy. We want it. We want it to do that. We want the sugars to get into our cells. But what if we have way too much glucose, or if we eat every day 6 or 7 times a day with glucose, and we're constantly raising our glucose levels, which is blood sugar, in our body? Well, what's going to happen is that those things are going to cause insulin to be released. And when we have excessive amounts of insulin in our body, it's something called hyperinsulinemia. It's a big fancy word. Hyper means more than. So you're going to have more insulin than your body necessarily needs. Now, that means your sugars are going to get pushed in. Now, eventually, if you're like me, your body may not even respond to that anymore. There are some other hormones we want to look at just to talk about hunger and satiety. Satiety means the feeling full, feeling content. So insulin should decrease your hunger, right? Like if you have excess insulin, you've got excess sugar, you've got plenty of energy, you shouldn't eat. Insulin should also stop your body from burning your own fat, right? If you've got enough glucose, why would you need to burn fat? You've got this energy sitting there waiting to go. And its job is to really try to keep your energy levels constant. You're going to have a constant amount of glucose in your bloodstream unless you have diabetes at all your life. It's going to make sure that if you have too much, it does its job, and if it goes away, then other hormones will kick in and release glucose. Okay? Another thing it does to help maintain this is it actually promotes fat storage. It promotes some of that excess energy to go into fat cells, which is what we want it to do if we're going to starve for 3 months out of the year. Other hormones you might want to know about. Leptin. So I want you to look at this diagram on the right-hand side. You're going to see leptin. Leptin is created by your adipose cells, which is your fat cells. And you see the green line. The green line means it's going to stimulate the region of your brain that secretes hormones that lead to satiety. So leptin is going to, like when your fat cells are full, your body should be satiated, or when you have enough fat. Ghrelin is on the left-hand side of the screen. If you look, it's also going to trigger something. So the ghrelin hormone is made by cells in your stomach, And those will actually trigger when your body is hungry, when your blood sugars drop, when you need something. Ghrelin triggers in your stomach and makes you actually hungry. It goes to your brain, which is this middle section here where it says hypothalamus pituitary gland. Now, the last one I want to talk about is GLP-1. There's a class of hormones in the middle there made by your intestines called GLP-1. And if you notice, it's a red line. So its job is to inhibit, right? That means it stops things from happening. So if you have an extra amount of GLP-1, it goes to that same region that ghrelin does, but instead of triggering hunger, it decreases hunger. Now, the reason I want to mention GLP-1s is because those agonists, those ones that are similar to those, Wegovy, Mounjaro, and Ozempic, are acting on this pathway, right? Those hormones are stopping your body from thinking you're hungry, even though you don't have the actual internal cues that are saying you're full. And so that's why they work so much to lower people's hunger. For me personally, they made me very nauseous, and it was an uncomfortable feeling. So why do I care about what my insulin level is, right? My doctor doesn't even take that blood number when I get my blood tested. Well, if you have excessive amounts of hyperinsulinemia, if you have excessive amounts of insulin, what you're going to end up with is a ton of different possible biological conditions. Arteriosclerosis, right? The hardening of the arteries, high blood pressure, cardiomyopathy. You're going to end up with obviously storing more fat than you want, which is why someone like me who has struggled their whole life to lose weight, even though I've been on low calorie diets, even though I've exercised, etc., those are caused by excess insulin. You look at type 2 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes is when your body has so much insulin in there that your body doesn't even respond to its own insulin anymore. You're pumping out a whole lot of insulin, but your body isn't using it properly, so you're not sensitive to it anymore. It's going to lead to problems called non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Which can lead to eventually cirrhosis of the liver, which actually could require a liver transplant. It's going to cause scarring in your liver because your body is dealing with this insulin problem, and so it's constantly having to process. Your central nervous system, it leads to Alzheimer's disease, problems with hormone balance and energy balance, brain development. A lot of cancers are actually stimulated by insulin because insulin's a hormone that builds things, right? It's an anabolic hormone. So its job is to build things like muscle. If you have no insulin, you don't build muscle well. That's part of why there was a wasting disease. But if you have cancer, it can actually build those cells, especially if you have sugar to feed those cells. This one, CKD, is chronic kidney disease. Again, elevated sugars can lead to these things, and elevated insulin can lead to that. Polycystic ovarian syndrome is insulin resistance of the ovaries. So specifically your ovaries are not functioning and doing their hormones appropriately. And part of the reason that that's happening is because you have too much insulin and it's affecting the normal functioning. Additionally, it also messes with the male testosterone. And can lower men's testosterone levels, or it can mess with the androgen production in a woman, which can actually lead to women having not only PCOS and infertility, but it can actually lead to facial hair and things along those lines. So this is just a small list. I know that seems like a huge list, but these are all the different body systems that your body can be affected if you have more insulin than you should naturally have in your system. So those of us like me who have had chronically elevated insulin are called insulin resistant. So over time, your cells will stop recognizing your own insulin signal and won't respond to it because your cells are like, no, I've got too much fat, I'm too full, and it's releasing inflammation and it's causing all kinds of problems. And it says, I can't take anymore, I can't take anymore. And your body stops responding to your insulin properly. So what does your body do? Your pancreas keeps working and pumping out more insulin to try to do what it needs to do. If your fat cells have reached their largest size, which most cells have a size limit, when your fat cells have reached their largest size, they can't respond to the insulin at all, and they can't store any more energy. So what they're kicking out are these oxidated particles, which leads to real severe inflammation in your body. Inflammation can cause arthritis, can cause joint pains, can cause psoriasis, can cause eczema, can cause all kinds of problems causing in your body. And so inflammation is something you want to avoid. It's also a trigger for many heart diseases. So chronically elevated insulin prevents you from accessing your stored fat because that's its job. When you have food, you don't need to access your stored fat, even if you're in a calorie deficit. So when I was eating 1,200 calories a day, but my insulin was high, my body didn't know that it was supposed to grab the extra calories out of my fat. And so I just metabolically shut down and was burning 1,200. My body thought it was in starvation mode. So that's why this lower calorie approach by itself cannot solve our weight problems. Okay. A recent study shows that 88% of adult Americans are considered metabolically unfit and have insulin resistance most likely. Not all have insulin resistance, but insulin resistance is a huge part of the metabolic syndrome. 38% of adults in the United States have prediabetes, and an additional 11.6% of adults have type 2 diabetes. That means that 49.6% of adult Americans have a clearly evident insulin resistance, that their body is not processing their sugars properly. And so therefore, taking in excess carbohydrates is going to make them struggle to keep their blood sugars normal. So now I want to talk about how insulin works with macronutrients. So I have to eat. There are 3 types of macronutrients I can get in my food. There's carbohydrates, simple and or complex. There's fats or lipids, right? Lipids a fancy name for the fat we eat, and protein. So those are the 3 things that when we eat food that we're going to find in them. Those are the macronutrients. Simple carbohydrates are sugars and the processed starches that most of our processed food has. And if you look at this red line on the right, when you eat that, immediately your glucose and insulin levels will spike in your blood to process those simple sugars. The simple sugars get turned into glucose for the most part. And so even things like breads, like white bread or wheat flours, anything like that will actually get turned directly into sugar, and they make your blood sugar spike pretty quickly. Now, a complex carbohydrate also gets turned into sugar, but it happens slower. So like a sweet potato or broccoli, when we break those down into the parts that we can, those carbohydrates are released slower into our bloodstream. So our sugars and our insulin spike less, right? So you're eating something that doesn't like get injected directly into your system. If you look at the lowest number on that spike is fat. So if I eat pure fat like butter, which I do not, but if you eat just pure fat, you're going to have the lowest insulin spike. The insulin will use it to break things down. It is useful, but it's an extremely slow process. You can see it lasts the longest, and it's a small, steady spike. When you put protein in conjunction with fat, like it is in meat, right? Like if you ate a steak, it's going to have fat and protein. When you put those together, protein has a pretty moderate spike, a low spike, even lower than this picture. This picture is like when you take like whey protein, like if I'm working out at the gym and I just use whey shakes, the whey protein, the pure protein itself will cause an insulin spike as well as a glucose spike because your body can process them differently. So what does that mean? What am I going to do with all this? I've got all these crazy hormones. You just talked about too many things, Pamela. What are you doing to me? What I want you to think about is we're going to give you advice on how you can maximize your body's own systems and hormones. We're not going to treat you like an engine that burns and just tell you eat less, move more. We're going to talk to you about eating the right amount and eating to your hormones. So in general, we need to lower our insulin levels to a healthy normal to get the maximum health benefits. Remember, insulinemia causes health problems. Hyperinsulinemia we want to avoid, so we have to get our insulin down. So the first thing to do that is we just need to get those processed foods and added sugars out of our diet. I want you to consider really focusing on whole foods, nothing packaged or bagged. If it has more than 4 ingredients on the label, you should probably not eat it. If you can point to it and say, that's a broccoli, right? That's a strawberry. That's a steak, that's a chicken, right? Then you're doing fine. I want you to prioritize the protein. Most of us are eating less protein than we need. And as you start to reach my age, when you get in your 40s, 50s, and 60s, you actually start losing muscle mass. And so the last thing you want to do is not have the protein building blocks to build your muscles when you're doing the right thing. Prioritize eating your protein. Now, most of us eat protein in an animal-based form. You can get it in a vegetarian form using legumes and different things, but they can be a little tricky because they also come with carbohydrates, not just with fat. Please don't fear animal fat. We have been told for a very long time that we should avoid all saturated fat, and the research does not match this. I know there are scientists out there saying saturated fats cause heart disease and all of that. We will discuss your cholesterol and we will discuss how that works and the new science that's coming out with scientific studies. I am a science teacher, and so I look at the research. I want you to eat butter, tallow, ghee, which is a refined butter. So like if you're sensitive to dairy, ghee might be comfortable for you. If you need to eat oils and you want to eat vegetable-based oils, go with olive, avocado, and coconut. Do not, I repeat, do not eat seed oils or margarine. These have been found to show extremely inflammatory effects in our bodies. Our bodies cannot process them. We did not evolve with them. We have actually created them in a laboratory, and they originally started making them in the industrial era and figured out that we could actually eat them and they wouldn't kill us so that we could sell them. It's kind of scary to think about. Eat your veggies if you want, right? If you want to be a vegetable eater, that's great, but you need to eat the lower carbohydrate vegetables. Don't eat corn, don't eat carrots, right? Those vegetables are not a good choice. Anything that grows underground, potatoes, sweet potatoes, carrots, they're going to be a lot higher in carbohydrates, and so they're going to be starchier for you. And you're going to want to avoid those. We'll be giving you lists or give you access to lists, or you can just Google keto vegetables and you're going to find a whole bunch of lists. I mean, like zucchini and cabbage and, all of these kinds of things like broccoli and cauliflower. And, you'll see kind of what's a balance. If you feel like you have to have fruit, like, oh my God, I can't live without my fruit, you need to stick to small helpings of things like berries and never ever drink your juices. So most fruits have been enhanced. We've grown them much bigger than they were in nature. And so we get these large quantities. And the problem is we eat them 52 weeks a year. But in nature, when we were evolving, we probably only had them 3 or 4 weeks a year. And they were actually used to help us put on calories so that when the winter came around, we had some stored stuff. In general, we really need to limit our sugar intake because sugar causes insulin, and insulin is what we're trying to limit. So we're going to be discussing a lot more strategies, recipes, and tips and tricks for the future. For those of you in my class, I want you to actually get out a piece of paper and I want you to do some goal setting and habit tracking. For those of you not in my class who are just watching this on YouTube, consider doing this for yourself. Our advice is that you need to have goal setting and habit tracking in order to make this work. And we don't want you to tackle everything at once, right? This is not like, oh my gosh, I have to do everything today. What I want you to do is set 3, maximum 5 habits that you're going to track in a month. 3 is plenty, right? Because you need a decent amount of time to know something's working. We want you to track them for a whole month to see how your body responds. This is not a fast weight loss program. This is health, 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 health. Can I get healthier? Do I feel better? So I want you to consider making one food-based habit. Maybe that's I get rid of all the processed foods from my home and I no longer buy them at the store, and I'm just not going to eat things that come in a box or a bag. I want you to get one movement-based. So I'm a very active person. I walk a lot, but walking has become like relaxing for me. I walk a lot of steps. Well, if you're a couch potato right now, I don't want you to say, I'm going to walk 10,000 steps every day. You'll never make that habit. But what if you just say 3 days a week, I'm going to get up and walk after I finish my dinner? Or if you're a very fit person, maybe you're changing and adding in weights. Whatever your movement based is, but find something that moves you and doesn't have you sitting sedentary. Then I want you to consider one lifestyle or emotionally based habit. Something like meditation, or like for me, my walks with a book on tape is actually an emotionally based thing. I also have a habit where once a week I take a day off from my work. I'm a school teacher, I work a lot, and I've actually had to make a habit that I would not work 7 days a week because otherwise I could. Right? So I want you to look at this journey as an experiment in one. You're the only participant. You're the only participant that needs to do this right. So whatever experiment you do, your journey and my journey are going to be a little different, and that's okay, right? We are creating a Facebook group specifically for our in-person members. So if you're an in-person member, you'll find our Facebook group. Those of you who are not in-person members, you'll just have to work through with our videos that are found on YouTube. Make sure you click the subscribe button. Otherwise, you're going to not know when I release the new videos from the next week. And then for your homework, What I want you to do is I want you to fact check everything I just said. I am going to tell you a lot of things over the next several months, and I don't want you to believe me completely by myself. I'm not lying to you intentionally, but I want you to look for the research yourself. I want you to listen to podcasts, watch YouTube videos. We're going to give you some suggested authors. Look at those and then find new ones, right? Bring those to the group. Help us know exactly who you're listening to because we might actually learn from you. And then I want you to stick to your habit and goals for the week and then come back next week, right? So you're going to work this week, 7 days, and then you're going to come back next week and we're going to talk about how we did. But you're going to set those goals once a month. So I really appreciate all of you for listening. I know I've been talking for a long time. These introductory videos probably take a little time. Have a wonderful day and good luck with your habits and your new journey.